Hi everyone, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Lana.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's Wellness Wednesday. Okay, so at this point in the semester, I'm sure you all have a lot of papers, assignments, and tests. And because of this, I'm sure that a lot of you are experiencing what's known as academic anxiety.
So we thought that it would actually be helpful to have a video that explains what exactly academic anxiety is, as well as provide coping strategies as to how to manage it. Even if you don't feel like you're experiencing it, we're still going to provide these coping strategies by the end of the video, which are super helpful, not just for performance anxiety or academic anxiety, but every type of anxiety. So my definition of academic anxiety is the feeling that you have to reach that A, that you have to get an A, and anything below is just simply not acceptable. So this means that like for every quiz, every test, every exam, no matter what, any assignment, I need to get an A and I need to hit that 90%. Otherwise, my self-worth may suffer as a result. I may feel inadequate or as though I don't deserve my education or my place as an undergrad student in APU, and that I'm just not doing enough to do the very best I could possibly achieve and get that degree that I want.
That's hard. I definitely understand where you're coming from in that. I would say that my personal definition of academic anxiety is just not being able to accomplish what you need to do in terms of school. So I feel like a lot of people know the feeling of studying so hard for a test or working so hard on an essay or something and then not really getting back the grade that you want, or also just being in a test and knowing that you studied all night long and then you just for some reason are not able to retrieve the answers that you know that you studied. So that's kind of my version of it.
Yeah, definitely. When you're trying to take a test and then it's just you just blank out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ball State University actually made an article explaining academic anxiety and giving some statistics about it, so we're going to share those with you. So for starters, academic anxiety is defined as feelings of worry, tension, or dread associated with anything that has to do with your academics. So this could be social pressures, wanting to get a good grade because everybody else is getting a good grade, or just worrying about actually having to work on an assignment or take a test.
So if you're one of those people that enjoys numbers and percentages and stuff like that, they actually came out with percentages saying that 63% of college students in the United States have actually had feelings of overwhelming anxiety in 2019. This same survey actually found out that 23% of the same individuals had been diagnosed or treated for some form of anxiety at one point in their lives. So because this was conducted in 2019, pre-COVID, the numbers may be a little bit different, maybe a little bit higher now or lower. But it should roughly be about the same amount. So that's actually pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is. In other words, if you're watching this video and realize that you actually experience academic anxiety as well, just know that you're not alone. This is something that lots and lots of people have to deal with. And that's why we're making this video. We're college students. We go through a lot of stressful situations. We have stressful semesters, and we're getting to the point, we just finished midterms, we're about to go into finals and everything. So just know that you're not alone. And because of this, we're gonna actually give you some coping strategies like we mentioned later on in the video, so don't worry.
So academic anxiety can actually manifest itself in 3 different ways: physically, cognitively, and outwardly through behavior. So physically, this can look like nausea, headaches, or even a nervous sweat. For example, when you're taking a test and you're super nervous or super scared. And cognitively, this can look like negative self-talk. So for example, you're telling yourself, oh, I can't remember anything, I don't know if I can do this, or you just have difficulties staying focused. And when you're trying to learn something and trying to study for something, you can't actually retain it. In terms of behavior, this can look like procrastination or completely giving up, finishing unrelated projects, or just doing something completely random whatsoever. And I think I definitely do have some experience with all of these.
Okay, so I experience academic anxiety a lot actually, but I'd have to say that the most prevalent example happened in high school. Okay, so in high school English class, it was probably my sophomore year, I had to recite a whole soliloquy from Hamlet, and it was the entire thing, and it wasn't in front of the class or anything, however, it was in front of the teacher, and we went outside to the balcony, and I was giving it, and I had studied, I studied for a really, really long time, and then I went out, and I was towards the end of the soliloquy, and all of a sudden my mind just blanked. And it was because I started getting anxious. Like, I saw my teacher, like, mark something down on her paper, and I was like, oh, like, did I get it wrong or something? And at this point, like, the academic anxiety definitely started to catch up with me. And I remember, like, my mind just went blank. I completely forgot the rest of it, and I just stood there for a little bit. And the teacher would, like, give us time to, like, think about it and to remember the next word. And I remember just standing there and my mind being completely blank, not being able to retrieve the rest of the speech. And then finally, when I was able to take some deep breaths and calm myself down, I was able to retrieve it and finish the rest of my speech. But I definitely remember that I was super, super stressed despite all of the studying that I did.
Oh man, dude, that is rough.
Yeah.
Like, that is really rough, especially when, like, your professor just marks something down.
Yes.
That is, like, peak anxiety right there. It's like, you're like, what are they saying? Are they marking me down, or are they, like, saying, like, oh, like, this is good?
Yeah.
You know, that really sucked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that sucks. But for me, I would say that my personal experience with academic anxiety, to preface this, I used to be a band nerd in high school, and so at the very end of each semester or the entire school year, our band director, he would be like, hey, you guys need to have this march memorized up to this point. So we had to remember all the notes, all the rhythms, pretty much everything, and have it pretty much efficient or like pretty much entirely memorized by the time that we take that test. And so the way that this test would work is that we would go outside and with our like little instruments or whatever, and it would just be like a one-on-one, me and the band director, and he would just sit there with like the music, like reading it while you're playing it. Oh, wow. So he would just be staring at you, basically kind of trying to like intimidate you to try to make you mess up, which kind of sucked because it's like, hey, like, I'm just trying to get by, right? I'm just trying to like play the music and show you that I know it. Mm-hmm. And so there would be everybody like outside the band room, like constantly practicing, trying to memorize it all the time. And every time that he'd be like, hey, you there, Lana, it's your turn, come outside right now. Or he would just like look around and be like, you, it's your turn. And like you'd walk out and then you're sitting there and you're like, oh my gosh, like, do I remember anything? And then it's just like, okay, you just go, just start it. And I remember always, like, whenever I would always play my piece, I would just be like, I would be sweating, like my armpits would be drenched. I would be like, I'm so afraid right now. Especially if like your teacher is just sitting there looking at you, expecting you to mess up. And when you mess up, it's not like, oh, it's fine, like he won't notice. No, he notices because he's reading the music. So there's like so much pressure, and it's so like anxiety inducing, and it was just so insane. And I hated that experience personally. But that was also the most extreme version of academic anxiety that I feel like I've ever gone through.
Wow, that's so scary. Like, not only was it, like, probably so anxiety-inducing just to have to remember the whole piece, but also it sounds like your teacher was really intimidating.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think he's just sitting there just, like the whole time.
Yeah. Okay, guys, so we're nearing the end of the video, so the time has come to give you guys all of our coping strategies that we feel like can really help you if you're ever experiencing bouts of academic anxiety. So the first one is taking a brain break. I know when you have like a lot of assignments coming up or something's due the day of or in a future date that you just want to keep working on your assignment until it's finished, but this is not necessarily the healthiest thing to do for your mental health. So we would say every once in a while, feel free to take a break, because if anything, it's just going to recuperate you and maybe like revitalize you. So maybe go outside, watch your favorite show, play a video game, read a fun book rather than the academic book that you've been reading for like so long. Just anything to get your mind off of it. I promise you may not want to do it in the moment, but it really, really helps.
Another coping strategy that you could use is something that's called decatastrophizing. So what this means is that you're kind of trying to work to map out the realistic bounds of certain outcomes. So for example, you want to think to yourself, what is a worst case scenario? And then what is a best case scenario? Then what is the thing that's most likely going to happen? So the way this works is that you kind of want to think about the worst case scenario and then the best. Obviously, right? So the worst case scenario is just as likely to happen as the best case scenario. So to put this in kind of like an example-ish type of thing, let's say that I'm worried about a test or an exam that's coming up. So I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like this is so crazy. Like when I actually sit down and take it, like I'm so worried about what's going to happen, like what grade I'm going to get. So if I'm just sitting there worried about the exam, I'm going to think to myself, okay, what is the worst case scenario? So the worst case scenario, if I were to fail the test, is that if I were to fail the test, my grade will drop down, right? My grade will drop down and my professor would be like, hey, this is like the worst you've ever performed out of all the tests that you've gotten, and I don't think you're learning anything, right? That's the worst case scenario. So the best case scenario, it would be that the professor would notice that everybody else's grades are not looking good, and they're gonna be like, oh no, I think I kind of like did something wrong with the tests. Everyone's putting in the right answers, but everything's coming out wrong. And so they just cut out the exam completely, and that exam does not count for that semester. So your grade isn't affected, right? That's the best case scenario. And so the most likely thing that's going to happen if I were to somehow mess up on the test is that, well, my grade's gonna drop, right? Okay, dang, that sucks. But realistically, I'm going to see my grade drop down and be like, okay, it's not the end of the semester yet. It's not the end of the world just yet. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to get my grade up through whether it be like extra credit opportunities or working extra hard the next assignment or the next test. So, funnily enough, this situation or this coping strategy actually works because we tend to look at things through what's called rose lens glasses. So we only tend to see what we want to see, which applies to our preconceived thoughts. So for example, like if I'm like so focused on like, oh, I'm going to fail the test, that's the only thing that you're going to see at all. You're only going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail. But if you realize that like, hey, you failing is just as likely as your professor like just taking out that test completely, you're gonna be sitting there in like a better spot, just gonna be like, hey, I mean, like, you know, I'm gonna try my best. That's all you can really do. You know?
Okay, guys, one last coping mechanism I'm gonna give you is one that you can use when you're so anxious that you almost feel like you're panicking, but like aren't in a place where you can go take a break or go take a walk or something. Like imagine you're like in the room, like taking the test right there, and you start panicking, realizing you can't retrieve your information. So basically what you're gonna wanna do is what's known as a grounding exercise. And there's so many grounding exercises. Like after this video, if you want to just search up different grounding exercises, you're going to find a ton. But one that I feel is really beneficial is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. And so basically you can just look around the room and be like, well, don't look at other people's tests or anything, but you can just be like, what are 5 things that I can see, 4 things that I can hear, 3 things that I can feel, 2 things that I can smell, and 1 thing that I can taste. Now, hypothetically, you're probably not going to be able to taste anything if you're taking a test unless your professor is allowing you to eat or anything, but it's just something to get your mind off of your test, even if just for like 30 seconds or something, just to like ground yourself, and then so that you're able to look at the test and keep going and hopefully be able to retrieve all the information. So yeah.
Okay, guys, that was everything that we had regarding academic anxiety. I hope that you were able to take away any kind of information from this, at least like walk away and be like, hey, I'm not the only one going through this. I'm not the only one feeling anxious about my academic performance. And to also realize that like, hey, like, even though you may be going through it, I mean, like, other people are going through it too. I mean, like, look at us. We're both college students, right? And you are a college student. So, I mean, obviously you're going to be going through some form of anxiety one way or another, especially when it comes to exams and other assignments when you want to perform highly, right? So I hope that you take away all the coping mechanisms and utilize them in any way that you can. And if you know a friend that may be going through the same thing, I would share this video with them, or just tell them like, hey, like, you know, here is some coping mechanisms that you could use that I learned. So yeah.
Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.